the largest oil exporter on Earth, is spending its oil money to make itself need oil less. If that works, a desert kingdom becomes a part owner of the global economy. If it fails, 35 million people run out of money long before they run out of sand. One man decides which way it goes. He was never supposed to. 10 years ago, almost nobody outside Riyadh could place his name. Then, inside a single decade, a war launched at 29, hundreds of the country's richest men held inside a 5-star hotel, a sliver of the most valuable company ever built sold to the public, and close to $1 trillion pointed at golf, football, video games, hydrogen, and computer chips. His government now spends more than it earns. And in February 2026, the stretch of water the entire plan floats on closed. None of this started with him. It started with arithmetic. Saudi Arabia was never in danger of running out of oil. There is enough underground to keep pumping for generations. The danger was always the price. And the price is decided by people who don't live there. A country that sells a resource doesn't need to tax anyone. And a government that doesn't tax never has to ask permission. For 50 years, the arrangement held perfectly. The state collected the oil money and handed it back as fuel subsidies, free health care, and a government salary for almost any citizen who wanted one. And in return, nobody asked to vote. That isn't a budget. It's a contract. But the contract carries a fatal asymmetry. Oil revenue is roughly flat across decades. Population is not. The kingdom went from around 6 million people in 1970 to more than 35 million now, and every one of them was born into the same promise. By 2025, the state needed oil near $94 a barrel simply to cover its own spending. The market was paying closer to $65. So the real product was never crude. It was a promise. And the promise got more expensive every year. The people holding it had children. Rewriting a contract like that requires someone able to overrule everyone who benefits from it. The royal family was built to make that impossible. Power passed sideways between aging brothers, each of whom controlled a ministry, a budget, a network of loyalty, and an effective veto. Decisions moved at the speed of consensus, which in practice meant they didn't move at all. Mohammed bin Salman was born into that system in Jeddah in 1985, one of hundreds of grandsons of the man who founded the country. Nothing in the succession pointed at him. What he had instead was proximity. While other princes were sent abroad for degrees and returned as visitors to their own bureaucracy, he stayed, took a law degree at King Saud University, and shadowed his father, a man who had administered Riyadh for roughly half a century, watching a dusty town become a metropolis. That is an unusual education. It teaches you the state not as an idea, but as a machine with levers, and it tells you exactly which levers nobody is watching. In 2015, his father became king. Within hours, the son was defense minister. Within weeks, he had launched a war in Yemen with no military background, and it went badly, and it kept going badly. The first public evidence that speed and judgment are different things. But notice what nobody could do about it. By 2017, his older cousin, the interior minister and longtime counterterrorism chief, had been removed from the line of succession. That November, more than 300 princes, ministers, and billionaires were summoned to the Riyadh Ritz-Carlton and did not leave for weeks. The state later announced it had recovered around $106 billion in settlements. The world read that as a shakedown, or as a purge, or as anti-corruption, depending on the newspaper. Mechanically, it was neither. It was the systematic deletion of veto points. Every independent power center inside the kingdom, military, religious, commercial, dynastic, was folded into one office. What used to require agreement now required a signature. And a signature can move very fast. What it moved toward was a single conversion. Oil in the ground is a stock, finite, spendable once, gone forever. What a country actually needs is a flow, income that arrives whether or not anything is pumped. Vision 2030, announced in 2016, was never really about tourism or cinemas or letting women drive. Those were consequences. The engine was the trade, sell the finite thing, buy the permanent thing. Step 1 was supposed to be enormous. 5% of Aramco, listed in New York or London, at a $2 trillion valuation, raising $100 billion. It didn't happen that way. By the time the shares finally sold in December 2019, the offer had shrunk to 1.5%, listed only in Riyadh, raising $25.6 billion, later stretched to 29. Foreign institutions had balked at the valuation. They had also spent a year watching the aftermath of the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi inside a Saudi consulate in Istanbul, an operation U.S. intelligence assessed the Crown Prince had approved. That gap between what he asked for and what he got is the most important number in this story. Global capital priced his political risk and charged him for it. The money still went somewhere. The Public Investment Fund held about $150 billion in 2015. It now holds north of $900 billion. roughly 4/5 of it deployed inside the kingdom, with the remainder buying stakes in Uber, SoftBank's Vision Fund, video game publishers, and professional sport. This is the part that quietly changed everyone else's world. Petrodollars used to flow back into Western government bonds, passive, invisible, lending money and asking nothing. Now the same dollars buy ownership, board seats, leagues, and tournaments. A resource state stopped being a supplier to the global economy and started becoming a shareholder in it. Ownership, though, exposes you to reality in a way that lending never does. NEOM was the test. A 170-kilometer mirrored city across desert and mountain, a ski resort, an island resort, a floating port. Construction on the line was suspended in September 2025. The fund took an $8 billion write-down. The 2030 population target fell from 1.5 million to 300,000 to 100,000, and the Asian Winter Games at Trojena were postponed indefinitely in January 2026. The fantasies died. Something else survived. The pieces still being built are a green hydrogen plant near completion, an industrial port, and data centers. Every one of them a business that sells something the rest of the world actually has to buy. Because underneath the architecture renderings there was always a sharper idea, and it is the most consequential thing this man has done. Energy that can't travel is worth almost nothing. Ship it as electrons, and you lose it to distance. But run it into a building full of processors, and it leaves the country as computation. Weightless, priced globally, entirely unaffected by tankers. Which is why Humane exists. Launched in 2025 under the fund and chaired by him, it has agreements to deploy up to 600,000 NVIDIA processors across Saudi Arabia and the United States, up to a gigawatt of AMD infrastructure by 2030, and 150,000 accelerators with Amazon in Riyadh. That is the same trade as before. Sell energy. Sell it in a form nobody can embargo. Except the chips are American, and every one of them ships only with Washington's permission. The kingdom didn't remove its dependency. It exchanged an old one for a newer one, held by a different government, revocable at speed. And the bill for all of it came due in the least abstract way imaginable. Executions hit a record, at least 322 in 2025. Male guardianship, the very system the reforms were sold as dismantling, was written formally into law in 2022. Asked about accusations of sports washing, he said he'd happily keep doing it if it raised GDP. Which is at least honest about the mechanism. Reputation is an input, purchased like any other. Then, on the 28th of February 2026, war with Iran effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz, and roughly 13 million barrels a day vanished from the market. Saudi storage filled. Exports were rerouted west across the country to the Red Sea, where by July they faced a threatened blockade at the other end. A transformation designed to escape oil was still funded by oil, and still floated through the same water. Both stories arrive at the same place. The old kingdom moved by consensus and would have run out of time. That much was arithmetic. The new one moves at the speed of one man, which bought the years the arithmetic demanded, and removed every mechanism capable of telling him he was wrong. Yemen, the line, Istanbul. The failures are not separate from the achievements. They are the same design, viewed from the other side. Because a system with no veto points has no error correction either. Every country sitting on a resource faces the identical problem. A stock that ends, a population that doesn't, and a narrow window to convert one into the other. Most never start. He started, in public, at full speed, with no margin and no break. The world has spent a decade arguing about whether he is a reformer or a tyrant. That was never really the question. He is the first person to run the conversion openly enough that everyone else can watch what it costs.